these various outlets and these various websites in these various churches are able to communicate to their believers and their church members and also to us in the outside world. Pretty amazing.
So a silver lining from the pandemic. You know, the stories, I think, right now coming out of Ukraine, of course, they tug at our heartstrings. Last night here at the NRB, the guest that we had on yesterday, Robert Jeffress, was the keynote speaker. He did a wonderful, really talk about persecution, how the church deals with it. And at the end, he actually gave kudos to our friend Kelly Shackelford and what he's doing in the religious liberty field. But after that, Ron Harris, who was the manager of a station in Dallas, and he leads a global ministry now, had us all gather and pray for Ukraine. And before we took off, we also heard from Chosen Road, the band that we had on as guests yesterday, and they were awesome.
One of the other things about Ukraine, another story, and then we'll get into some of the issues in the news because we've posted some of those over the last couple of days, is one of the individuals our friend was talking about. He says, I was just really concerned about my family, so he took his wife and his 5-year-old wrapped in a blanket, and he got them to the Poland border and then went back to Ukraine. Can you imagine leaving your child and your wife and then going back to Ukraine? So
because the men are staying to fight.
They are. And it's interesting because we won't probably get into this, but there was an interesting survey done just the other day by our friends at Rasmussen asking if indeed there was ever an invasion of America, would you stay or leave? And it was a high percentage of people that are more liberally inclined to say, we'll just leave. Whereas the individuals that believe in this country and patriotism would stand and fight. And you're seeing that right now in Ukraine. And let's, if we can, talk about the fact that even during a war, it is a good example of the first casualty is language. Because apparently the United Nations has been telling individuals that you can't refer to it as a war. Did you see that the other day? I mean, I think we even posted that one the other day. It was Wall Street Journal. You can call it a conflict, or would you have a military
offensive?
Yes.
Yeah, the New York Post also posted something like that. So the UN staff is told not to call this a war or an invasion. They can't use that word. And the UN, of course, is trying not to offend Russia. And something about a 15 years in prison and a $14,000 fine in Russia for spreading fake news about the military.
So again, if you even use the word war, you could spend 15 years in prison if you're in Russia. But if you use the war phrase or anything like it in the United Nations, you'll at least get your hand slapped. And one other thing I saw here, there's an email that also said that they didn't want anybody to actually have the Ukrainian distinctive blue and yellow flag on any of their social media accounts, any of those pins and those kinds of things. So as we've said before,
that's the UN saying that.
Yeah, the UN just has never been one that we've been endorsing from point of view, but it's just a good illustration of how crazy some of that has become. After the break, I do want to talk a little bit about what we've learned a little bit more about some of the biological things that are taking place. But one other real quick story from Ukraine, and that is where there was an attempt to take these MiG-29 jet fighters and to transfer them from Poland to Ukraine. Now, the reason for that is that it turns out that you could, in Ukraine, Ukrainian pilots with minimal training could actually fly some of those Soviet-era planes. And so the plan was, the United States would facilitate that. And, of course, you know the rest of the story. Somewhere along the line, the Biden administrations thought, no, we don't want to offend Vladimir Putin.
And they don't need them.
Yes.
Even though they're begging for them.
Yeah, they lack substantive rationality, and it's not tenable. And
well,
so,
guess where those planes are now? They're here.
Yeah. So, again, there you can see it. And you might say, well, why wouldn't Poland just do it directly? Well, they share a border with Russia, with Belarus, and with Ukraine. So obviously they wanted to stay out of it, but they wanted to provide that. Would have been something that could have been easily provided by the United States. But again, just we don't want to offend people with the language by talking about war. We don't want to offend Russia by actually having those planes fly overhead, which could take out some of these batteries that are tracking individuals. And so as a result, as I've said before, one of the first battles and one of the first casualties in a war is sometimes the language and some of the actions. And we seem to be a little more intimidated. And don't you think that Vladimir Putin, now seeing that, thinks, I'll just keep engaging in all sorts of bluster.
Absolutely.
And then there will be no deterrence, because I'll just keep saying what I want the United States to do and what I want Poland to do and what I want Germany to do, and they'll just capitulate to all of that.
It's amazing. I think a little bit later we're going to talk about oil and the role in this conflict, and just the policies of the Biden administration along fossil fuels. So I thought it was interesting in the Babylon Bee today because we did stop buying Russian oil, or at least that policy has been announced. And Hillary Clinton says she's going to stop importing dossiers.
Only the Babylon Bee, for sure. Let's take a break, and we do have some comments from the CIA director, but also for 2 weeks we've had fact checkers saying it's just a conspiracy. It is disinformation, saying that there was any kind of biological activity or biological weapons or biological research, but we found out differently. We'll talk about that right after these important messages.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Over the last 15 years of doing this commentary, I occasionally use the famous quote from G.K. Chesterton, "Don't ever take a fence down until you know why it was put up." A corollary might be, don't defund a program or institution merely because you haven't used it in some time. We live in a dangerous world. It is easy to forget that if you live in a safe neighborhood and haven't seen a war break out in Europe for more than 7 decades. There are criminals, terrorists, and dictators that threaten us. It's easy to forget until Vladimir Putin sends his Russian troops into Ukraine. He scoffs at the civilized Western world. He uses his power and military might while giving little attention to diplomacy. In fact, many leaders idolize his quest for power and prestige. Perhaps that explains why Donald Trump continues to say flattering and disturbing things about Putin, as well as other dictators in China and North Korea. NATO, the U.S. military, law enforcement, and even our wall on our southern border are examples of Chesterton's fence. We haven't needed NATO for some time. Democratic leaders in Congress want to reduce the size of the military, which we don't seem to be using very much. Why not defund the police? And isn't it time to tear down the wall that President Trump was building? Most people know the famous scene in A Few Good Men, "You can't handle the truth." But the next line from Colonel Nathan Jessup is relevant here. "Son, we live in a world that has walls, and those walls have to be guarded by men with guns." Walls and people with guns, both military and law enforcement, are what keep us safe and free. Vladimir Putin reminds us of that. The rising crime rate in our cities and current flood of illegal immigrants also remind us of that. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Inflation, go to viewpoints.info/inflation. That's viewpoints.info/inflation.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, broadcasting live from the National Religious Broadcasters Convention here in Nashville, Tennessee. And I look up there and I see your son actually watching the program here as well. Penna Dexter is with me, of course. And we are going to, in just a few minutes, be talking with our friend Chuck Bentley. But before we do so, Penna, I thought we'd talk a little bit more about Ukraine and then move from there to some others. First of all, the CIA director the other day, William Burns, actually made the argument that because of the frustration that he believes Vladimir Putin might be facing, that indeed he may actually, as he said, double down and try to grind down the Ukrainian military with no regard for civilian casualties. And you might say, well, first of all, he's CIA director, so he probably knows something about this. He also was an ambassador to Russia, so in some respects he understands Vladimir Putin perhaps better than most. And it's just a sad reality of what we are seeing before us, because this is playing out in a way that is so concerning. And just one more point before we get into what has been kind of one of the news items here in terms of those biological weapons factories and research being done. As CIA director, he also said that Vladimir Putin probably engaged in this war based on 4 false assumptions. Number one, he thought that Ukraine was weak. Number two, he believed that Europe was distracted and probably wouldn't mount a very strong response. Number three, he thought that Russia's economy was prepared to withstand those sanctions. And number four, believed that Russia's military has been modernized and would fight effectively. And he's been basically wrong on all 4 points. And if you had asked many military analysts, or even most of us around the table, what would happen when Russia enters, we would have thought that it would be a quick and decisive victory, but it hasn't been that.
And since it hasn't been, I guess the question is, will he go part way and then try to install his own pro-Russian, pro-Soviet leaders, and then there'll be constant conflict going on, or will Putin just go in and destroy Ukraine?
And we
Those
certainly
are the two
don't know
options,
that.
I
Yeah,
think.
but neither are good, and we will continue to cover that. And I suspect, as we've said before, we'll be covering it for some time. But, you remember where we were hearing for the last couple of weeks, we even mentioned it, I think, once on Point of View, the fact checkers telling us that this idea that there were biological research or biological weapons labs or any kind of chemical weapons labs or anything like that being used in Ukraine, and that this could be something that would be of concern if Russia took them over. Remember how there was fact checker after fact checker saying...
Well, they were saying, do they practice biological warfare? And the answer was no. But anytime you have biological labs, they can be turned into biological weapons. And
what I think turned that around is Senator Marco Rubio the other day, talking with the Undersecretary of State, Victoria Nuland. Actually, it was at a Foreign Relations Committee meeting, and I watched it, and then I heard some other people talk about it, so I could be wrong, but it's almost as if what Marco Rubio was trying to do is just ask the question, does Ukraine have chemical or biological weapons? Expecting her to say no, end of discussion. So we'll end this conspiracy theory. And that's not what she said.
She didn't say that. She didn't say it. It was interesting. I thought he very calmly asked the questions of her. And, of course, Victoria Nuland said we're working with them, because we have been working with them to set up those biological labs in Ukraine. That may not have been a good idea. But now we're working with them to help prevent bioweapons from coming out of there. And, of course, these are some dangerous viruses in some of these labs in Ukraine. So it's kind of scary that we've got a war going on right there in the 2 cities where those labs are most prevalent, which is Odessa and Kyiv.
Well, again, those are 2 places where, again, their military are making inroads, so it's a real concern. And again, it's just a good example of what we've tried to explain to our listeners on many occasions. Just because a fact checker says that something is wrong, sometimes you have to fact check the fact checkers.
Right.
And here's a good example of why we say one of the most important things that we can pass on to our listeners is discernment. And I think all of us need a fair amount of discernment after seeing that one, because nobody expected the answer that came from her. Now they tried to walk it back and say, yeah, they're just doing an investigation. But again, just recognize what is in those labs. They aren't maybe as high level as what was in Wuhan. But again, after experiencing everything from the Wuhan Institute of Virology, what we didn't want to find out is some individuals that probably don't know very much about handling biohazards, maybe teenagers or 20-something military going into these labs. You can see
that
what
have
that
no
is.
idea what they're encountering.
Not to mention firing on a nuclear plant as well, and what that could have created another Chernobyl. But one point you did mention a minute ago, the other day we posted a piece by our good friend Dennis Prager on how the whole issue of Ukraine and the invasion ties back to the environmentalist. And we did post it yesterday, and it's still available on our website if you'd like to find it.
Dennis Prager, he doesn't mince any words. He said the war wouldn't be happening without the green agenda. And, of course, we've all been hearing the battles over our oil industry. And, it's really a good solution if we could just been producing more oil and encourage European countries to limit their consumption of Russian oil, and we'll be the ones providing it. It will encourage our oil industry, but I don't think the Biden administration is having anything to do with that idea right now.
It was so interesting, and again, we've posted that article yesterday. Some of the other ones we just talked about Russia doubling down, about not being able to call it a war, those are on today's. But if you go to our website and either hit the button that says search or even hit the button that says shows, you will find the one that we're talking about from yesterday. And he reminded us of something I'd sort of forgotten, and that is the closing price of oil in 2020 was $39.68, or basically $40 a barrel. Now it's $138 a barrel. And so you go from basically $40 to almost $140, and you can see those environmental prices have been very extensive indeed, because once you start shutting down the environment, those are the kinds of things that happen very quickly.
Well, everybody's worried about inflation, and that certainly could be contributing to it. And, just speaking of our policy with regard to the oil industry, the senator from West Virginia, Joe Manchin, the Democrat, he says, let's just go back the way it was before. We're asking the rest of the world to step up. We should step up and get our oil industry going again.
Well, again, you can see what that has done. So we're going to be, in just a minute, talking with a good friend, Chuck Bentley, and we've got information about his book and, of course, all the things at Crown Financial. But here's just a good illustration of something we're going to be talking about. You know that the last couple of days we've been posting some commentaries on inflation and how, indeed, that is going to be affecting individuals in some pretty dramatic ways. And I'll get his comments about that in just a minute, because when you talk about inflation and individuals in the administration right now saying, well, if you don't want to pay gas prices, go buy a $110,000 Tesla. What? That's your answer? Or, or if we're just all going to have to suck it up. And it's like, okay, that's easier for you if you're making a six-figure income. But if indeed you're on a fixed income or you're middle income or lower income, a high percentage of what you spend for food and transportation and shelter are actually affected by those gas prices. It's real easy to say, well, we all just need to stand up for some of these foreign policy issues. We need to have a better environment. But there are some definite consequences for actually taking on some of these policies which have been implemented by the Biden administration. And earlier we had a chance to talk with Tony Perkins, who you know only so well. We'll play that next week. We had to record that one because he couldn't be with us live. And we were talking about how this may just play out in this next election cycle. You might remember in 1994, you had 56 Republicans newly elected to Congress through the Contract for America. Then in 2010, you had 64 Republicans elected to Congress, and those were what are called red waves. Well, if this keeps playing out, we're not just going to see a red wave during the midterm elections. We might see a red tsunami.
Well, the Biden administration doesn't want gas prices to go up, I think, because of the election. We'll have to ask Chuck Bentley a little bit more about this. But they're saying now that it's Russia's fault that we have inflation, which is just a crazy really statement to make, because before the invasion of Ukraine, we were already battling inflation. And, some of it had to do with all the spending that came with COVID relief. That was one, and not allowing people to work and people not wanting to go back to work. The killing of the Keystone Pipeline and all the other things that we've done to our oil industry to make gas prices go up. So many policies of the administration have actually been the reasons that we have inflation. And some of these things could be reversed easily if we have a different Congress, perhaps.
Yes, with a different Congress for sure. We're going to take a break, and we are broadcasting live from the National Religious Broadcasters Convention here in Nashville, Tennessee. Chuck Bentley will be with us. We'll be talking about his book, Economic Evidence for God, Uncovering the Invisible Hand That Guides the Economy. Next, I'll be talking with our good friend Tony Evans, Dr. Tony Evans, Oneness Embraced, a kingdom race theology for reconciliation, unity, and justice. But we need to take a break, and we'll be back right after these messages.
We live in a digital generation. Point of View is reaching this often overly plugged-in generation with truth. You can keep up with us 24 hours a day using your phone, your tablet, your laptop, or your desktop. Search for the Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, where you can keep up with today's issues, learn about current and upcoming guests by liking us on Facebook. Also, follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @PointOfViewRTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. Learn, interact, make a difference with Point of View using new media. And here's one way you can make a big difference. Help us increase our reach by spreading the word among your friends. Share a Facebook post. Tag us in a tweet. With enough joining us to plant seeds, we'll see a tremendous harvest. Come on, it only takes a minute. Search for Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, @PointOfViewRTS on Twitter, and subscribe to the Point of View Radio Talk Show channel on YouTube. Learn, interact, share. The Point of View Radio Talk Show. Point of View will continue after this.
You're listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, broadcasting live from the National Religious Broadcasters Convention in Nashville, Tennessee. Penna Dexter with me. And Penna, this is going to be fun because one of the individuals that we've interviewed for many years is a man by the name of Chuck Bentley, CEO of Crown Financial Ministries, as well as, of course, the host of My Money Life, and just a really good friend and an individual that almost always joins us during Truth Team because he says so many nice things about us, even if some of them are undeserved. So, Chuck Bentley, thank you for being with us again.
Well, the reason I say those nice things, Kerby and Penna, is because I believe in what you're doing. I know you to be people of character and high capacity, and my wife and I have determined that we wanted to be on the Truth Team ourselves, so why wouldn't I invite other people to do that? So we hope that you have all the support you need to continue spreading the truth across the airwaves, and congratulations on 50 years. Just a remarkable achievement, Kerby. So many businesses don't make it 5 years, 10 years. I think less than 20% of all companies survive past 20 years.
Yes.
And here you are now, 5 decades. So
and again, for people that don't remember, Larry Burkett started this, and you know what it's like because once the founder leaves, there were some questions about, okay, who's going to replace Marlon Maddox? Well, nobody's going to replace Marlon Maddox, but can we keep it going? And Penna remembers all those conversations. Marlon Maddox started that in 1972. When he left us in 2004, a lot of people said, well, that's that. You know, he'd actually done it for 32 years. But here you can do the math and figure out I've been doing it for 36 years. We overlapped about 18 years. And you're going to be with us tonight because we are going to have a celebration of 50 years. And so thank you so very much for being part of that as well.
Well, I remember those early years when you and Marlon were overlapping, and it was never any question in my mind whether or not you would be able to carry the ball down the field, Kerby. And honestly, you've done such a great job, and I appreciate it, what God's done through your life and ministry.
You know, Marlon was smart enough to create a team to come alongside himself, and so Kerby was there ready to take the reins. And, yeah, I mean, Kerby's got a lot of talents and sort of a set of personality traits that I think make him very successful doing this. But we are so grateful for your ministry also. It's very... What you do with your money as a believer it really says a lot about your walk with the Lord and your faith, doesn't it?
Well, it does, Penna, and I'm a product of our very own ministry. The ministry impacted my life and was a huge blessing to us in every way, and so I'm motivated out of personal conviction to help others experience the freedom that we have in our lives.
I might just mention your wife is here as well, and you have 4 adult sons, and you just drove over here from Knoxville, right?
Yes,
so
and we get to see our grandchildren while we're here, so it's a double blessing.
Let's, if we can, real quickly, we have posted on the website, and I have read the digital copy of the Economic Evidence for God, Uncovering the Invisible Hand That Guides the Economy, coming out later this month. And I love this because you take us through God's creativity, all the different varieties of tomatoes. You take us through also a kind of a structure. Didn't you like that, Penna, because he had, you know, those who believe God is God, those who believe I am God, those who believe they're false gods, and then applies that to all the economic issues. So he takes all the worldview things we talk about here at Point of View and then applies them to the economic area and makes it, as always, so readable.
It's very readable, practical, and you know, you talk about this evidence. It's in your title, but we actually create in our economic activity economic evidence for God, don't we?
We do. All of our financial decisions actually either reinforce the fact that God's truths are real and valid and reliable, or we try to deny them and suffer the consequences, and that's reinforcing of his evidence. And that construct, Kerby, I appreciate the fact that you liked it because I came up with that just reading through the 10 Commandments. When the Lord said, you shall have no other gods before me. And of course, that was the challenge, the gauntlet he threw down to Pharaoh. And Pharaoh wanted to oppose him and set himself up as a god. And you realize that our response to that first commandment will determine our culture and our form of government. Those who worship God will experience freedom. Those who set themselves up as a god will experience totalitarianism. Those who consider government is a god, they will experience socialism, and those who worship idols will simply suffer economically. There's no example of any culture that worships a physical idol that grows financially very well at all.
It's just amazing because your chart sometimes will show that, and also the difference between a corrupt society and one that has law. All the way through, there are times when you just have sort of these aha moments that I'm sure for people that will be reading this as this book comes out will be appreciating, because Penna, as we were going through that, there were just all sorts of times when I said, yeah, that's a good point. And he's got the documentation for things we've been talking about here on Point of View.
You know, God's plan is the best plan for people. And I think right now, as our culture goes away from God's plan, and we don't even, you can say that, you know, most of the populace don't understand God's economy or his plan for the economy. He does have one. And to the extent that we get away from it, we experience a lot of the problems that we are seeing, don't we?
Well, totally, Penna. And I go back in the book to what Adam Smith said, that he believed that the economy was controlled by supply and demand. This invisible hand of people want things and there's a limited supply. And so that's the hand that sort of churns everything. But he followed on and said, actually, that economy doesn't work very well without virtuous people.
That's right.
And so he recognized, without admitting it, that the things that God taught us are necessary for a high-functioning, high-growth economy. Morality improves an economy dramatically. And where you see either one of the Ten Commandments ignored or violated, or all of them, you see economic suffering. So the simple example is most people don't like to live in a place where there's high murder rate. And if there's a high murder rate, then the value of the real estate is going to suffer, businesses will shut down, and it starts to collapse the economy. But where there's security and safety, the economy will grow. Well, that's a principle that God taught us early on. And those who observe that experience the goodness of God. And that's just one example.
You know, looking at it internationally, the most corrupt nations are often the poorest, aren't they?
Oh, always. It's a universal principle. Corruption is the cancer of any economy. And yet people don't know how to address it. And that's why the transformation of the gospel creates a better economy, because we become better economic actors. And when you have good economic actors who have high trust, then commerce moves much faster. And there's no way to compete with it, because corruption adds layers and layers and layers of cost. That if you have a trusting society, because people are transformed and trustworthy, then you have a economic growth. It's pretty straightforward.
You know, I love the positive message because, you know, people think they're going to be struggling in life, and we often do struggle and work hard to make a living. But really, God creates abundance, and there are certain principles. You can't say that exactly you'll get this if you do this, but really overall, if you live in accordance to God's principles for the economy, you will be provided for.
Yes, God was not unkind when he created the world. He didn't drop us in here and, you know, the theory of evolution where we were started out as stupid cavemen and we're just struggling for survival. God put Adam and Eve in a place of abundance. In fact, a garden is an economic marvel. It produces far more than you can ever consume yourself. And it allows us to be well taken care of and then to be outwardly focused. God intends to supply our needs so we can think of others. And it's not the prosperity gospel where you try to extract that important element of work from the equation. God intended for us to work so that we would experience his provision, because work is good for us, and it wasn't a part of the fall. It's really, in many ways, we're most like God when we're working and creating.
Going to take a break, but when we come back, maybe let's follow up on that idea of work for just a minute, because there's a lot of myths and misinformation about what work is, and is work something that we have just because of the fall, and will we work in heaven, and those kinds of questions that you certainly address. But let me just real quickly mention that, of course, we have information about the book that you can get before it has come out, and of course we have a link to crown.org, and I would encourage you to go and get some of the information that will maybe help you with your own finances. Maybe you are starting starting to figure out, how am I going to make all of this work, and how can I really begin to make sense of the world around me, and how can I, as Penna was talking about, be a good steward. We're supposed to be good stewards, and it's amazing how many times the Bible, especially because Chuck's educated us on that, talks about financial issues. So we'll talk about that with him. And if you are just joining us again, we're talking with him, and of course the book coming out shortly, Economic Evidence for God, Uncovering the Invisible Hand That Guides the Economy. Penna Dexter with me, and don't forget, in the next hour we're going to be talking with our good friend Tony Evans. We'll be talking about his new book, which is out, and so there are some great opportunities for you to learn about books that are either out or will be out shortly, as we have a chance to talk with these incredible guests that we are privileged to talk with today. Let's take a break. We have a lot more to cover. We'll be back right after these important messages.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, talking with Chuck Bentley at the National Religious Broadcasters Convention in Nashville, Tennessee. And Penna, I was just thinking about the fact that since we're getting into this issue of work, you know, if you pay people not to work, guess what? People don't work. And then when you stop paying people to not work, they still don't work. And this, I think, is the first hotel that some of our staff have been in where they've actually come in and decided to clean the rooms because they can't find enough people.
They gave you new towels, but really after the pandemic, it wasn't a quick turnaround. You didn't have people coming back, and, you know, it's still a problem out there getting staff. I know a lot of business owners who are struggling. But, you know, our economy is not going to work very long on that. We need people out there working, innovating, starting businesses. And that's really what the American system is. But I want to go and just kind of ask you about population growth. And, there's people out there that'll say, well, we've got to make sure that, we limit the population because we don't have enough resources to feed these people. But really, I loved reading in your book about the fact that the population grows, the resources grow with them.
Yeah.
And that is another part of God's plan.
Well, the 70s best-selling book, The Population Bomb, really should be classified as fiction because it wasn't based on reality. It was based on a lot of fear and a lot of hype. It was a doomsayer's perspective. But yet, Penna, people have accepted that paradigm throughout our university system, that it's bad to have children and that we're overpopulated and we're going to starve to death. We're going to reach peak population where this earth is going to run out of resources, but nothing can support that thesis. Certainly reality doesn't, because God created man to be a producer. And their premise is we're just greedy consumers. We're just here, eating too much and pillaging the earth, and we're not adding any value. And that's what's so wrong with this idea that people, don't need to work. We don't need them in the economy. We actually do. We need them to experience the joy of being God's producer, because most people put more value into the world than they consume. And so we're always outpacing population growth by available resources. And there's really nothing to fear. Yeah. It's a concept that God knew how to create us in order to survive on this planet. We work and produce more than we consume.
One of the other unbelievable blessings that God provides is the family and marriage. And there's really an economic premium to marriage, isn't there?
Well, that's one topic that I really like to speak about, because there's so many young people that have been deceived right now to believe that if you delay marriage or you postpone marriage or you figure out some alternative living arrangement, that you'll be better off financially. And it's been embedded in their thinking such that we're now seeing the lowest level of family formation in American history, meaning two people get married, start a family, and begin a life. And all the evidence points to the fact that when God said two are better than one, it's true economically. It's not even a close contest. In every part of the world where covenant marriage is upheld in the culture and monogamy is honored, there's faster economic growth. And when you see a culture that doesn't believe in covenant marriage, doesn't believe in faithfulness in marriage, you see economic destruction. And it's such a simple evidence for the reality of God. He created it to be that way, that two are better than one. And all the economic data supports that. And it seems so obvious to me that people would want to understand that and enjoy the benefits of being in a faithful relationship.
Yeah.
Chapter 5 on the marriage premium. It's important to get married and it's important to have children. And again, it's not a zero-sum game and those kinds of ideas. All part of the economic evidence for God. But since we only have a few minutes left with you, but I want to get a whole hour with you when this book is actually available. I did want to mention your previous book, 7 Gray Swans, Trends That Threaten Our Financial Future, because that is the closest thing to a prophetic book by Chuck Bentley, because you have been predicting what has unfolded over the last 2 years. And it's a real concern when we talk about universal basic income, when we talk about the promotion of socialism, and we talk about some of the economic chapters and even social credit scores. Some of the things you were talking about theoretically have now come to fruition, haven't they?
They're upon us, Kerby. I was just reading this past week. I wrote about facial recognition technology being a useful convenience, and it is. It's simple just to walk past a line and, be admitted on the plane or whatever it's used for. But it's now becoming a form of corporate totalitarianism, where you could be canceled just based on your facial scan and not even realize you're no longer going to be allowed on that plane or in that building or into that bank account. And so those things are here now, and the world is starting to recognize the danger of those trends. I think I need to do an update on the book.
I think you do.
It's and the point is to try to help people to be aware. I don't think the cloud is secure. I think we are living in an era of fragile networks where we sign those agreements without reading them and just put our data out there on some electronic server that we have no control over. So those are some of the things that still concern me.
Well, again, we are always talking about things in the news, and just the other day, President Biden and his administration said we're going to look at digital assets, and those are CBDCs. Well, that's central bank digital currency. That's different than Bitcoin. That's is where the central bank issues a coin, and then it's like having a checking account, or even more so like a credit card. That means the central bank, the Federal Reserve, and the federal government know how you spend every one of your dollars, and if they don't like you, then they could freeze your account. Now, Penna, that would never happen like in Canada or anything, right? And again, these are things you were talking about, but now they're starting to happen right before our very eyes.
Yeah, it's chilling what's going on, and I think we are trending towards a cashless society, no doubt about it. And I think government intervention is going to be essential. They are not going to allow for some private form of currency to usurp their governance over the world's money supply. It's just not going to happen. And so I think they are going to interject themselves and start to monitor that and even try to displace the freedom that the idea is that cryptocurrencies will bring you economic freedom. They're going to step into that, I think, for sure.
Yeah, but again, we've seen what happens in China, and we saw now what happened in Canada. So when people look and say, I don't know, but Chuck, I think you're just overdoing it here with the social credit score. Now I think we see what he's been predicting for some time.
Chuck, are you going to be putting together some helps for Christians to navigate this type of a society?
Well, right now, the number one request we're getting is how to save money at the gas pump. I mean, people are asking us every single interview, like, hey, what do I do about this? And then, of course, the threat of ongoing inflation is going to be a very real challenge for the average family to navigate. So I'm working on some of those practical helps right now, but I do want to update. How do we live through what I think is coming? Those things will come to America. They are on their way now. The very things that we wrote about, the things that you see and talk about, which I want to say why your program is so important. So essential to bring the light, the salt, the truth into the culture every single day. And we'll come back and talk about that more.
Well, we certainly will. Well, again, it has been great to have you with us today. And Penna, as you can see, this is why we love to have him on the program all the time.
We look forward to having you back. It's amazing how fast things change, and the things that you're saying now could come a lot faster than we expect. So I'm glad you're on the case.
Yeah, thank you, and appreciate you both.
Crown Financial, again, you can go to crown.org, and if you want to know more about your career, about how to spend your money, if you'd like to know about some of these books, it's all right there. And I support that ministry, encourage you to do the same, because it is just an outstanding ministry, and you've been a good friend for all these years, so it's great to have you here.
Thank you.
We need to take a break, though. When we come back, we're going to talk with our good friend Tony Evans. He has a new book out, Oneness Embraced, a Kingdom Race Theology, that I think you'll appreciate. Broadcasting live from the National Religious Broadcasters Convention here in Nashville, Tennessee. We'll be right back.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. Pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, broadcasting live from the National Religious Broadcasters Convention here in Nashville, Tennessee. Penna Dexter with me, and I've been looking forward to this interview, and know you have as well.
I think a lot of folks have. We've got quite an audience here.
Yeah, we've got quite an audience. Again, Dr. Tony Evans, Senior Pastor of Oak Cliff Bible Fellowship, Urban Alternative. We have interviewed him on so many different books, but this one has just come out, Oneness Embraced, a Kingdom Race Theology for Reconciliation, Unity, and Justice. And they also showed me a shorter version of that. They are published by Moody. We have information about Dr. Evans, about the book on the website, and we have both taken the time to go through this book, and it is going to be hard to get even some of it into a half an hour, but we'll probably do a 1 hour interview later on because there's so much packed into that book. But Penna, I know you appreciated some of the insights from Dr. Evans.
Well, I think, Dr. Evans, this is the book that the church has been waiting for. We've been looking at the problems of race. It seems like after we elected a black president, the discussion of racism just accelerated. And so, you know, the church needs to be the solution, yet at this point, it really isn't. And I think you've put a lot of prescriptions in this book that will help us if we heed them. First of all, I just want to ask you about a term you used in the book. In the first chapter, broken liberty. What is that?
Well, if we start with the Liberty Bell and the crack in it, that was a great visual of the crack in our society, where there was the proclamation of liberty without the equal access to the liberty that was being proclaimed. So the crack in the bell is a reflection of the crack in our culture, racially and culturally, that has continued to be broken and gone unresolved, starting with the church, but of course greatly bleeding into the culture.
Well, a verse that's prominent in the book is Acts 17:26. He made from one man every nation of mankind to live on all the race of the earth, and on the face of the earth. And, you know, we just want to divide ourselves. It seems that we are not heeding that verse. To the extent we diverge from that truth, we have racism, don't we?
Well, absolutely. The root of this has to start. We spend so much time dealing with the fruit. We keep picking fruit and get new fruit growing on the same tree because we fail to address fully the root. The root of our human identity is the Imago Dei. That is the image of God. The image of God starts in the womb, but it continues to the tomb. Because there has been this separation between the right to life in the womb and the dignity of life to the tomb, that has created something that God never separated. The word imago, the reference to the Imago Dei is in James 3, where if you even curse a person, you are attacking the image of God. So abortion attacks the image of God in the womb, but racism attacks the image of God by denying the dignity of human life. in whatever way that is being manifested or reflected.
Talking with Dr. Tony Evans, the book is entitled Oneness Embraced, a Kingdom Race Theology for Reconciliation, Unity, and Justice. One of the key chapters is on oneness. And, of course, we've heard you talk about oneness in marriage, but now we're talking about unity. And, again, if the church was able to come to grips with this biblically, we wouldn't be dealing with this problem. So first of all, you talk about oneness, but then you also have a chapter where you talk about sort of good and bad examples of oneness in the Bible. So talk about what you mean by oneness and how we can come together as one.
Well, you know, in Genesis chapter 11, they had a big idea of becoming one independently of God, and that's called the Tower of Babel. And they decided to become unified in opposition to God's command and God's word. Whenever you have unity that is not reflecting what God wants, you're going to wind up in chaos. So they had this one world idea, humanism, a man-centered idea, and God came up with an interesting observation. He came down, because no matter how high you go up, God still got to come down, because you can't get but so high independent of him. But he came down, and when he saw that they were trying to have unity independent of him, he said, if we don't stop this, there will be nothing that they will not be able to do. That's a surprising statement. But what God was saying was unity is so powerful that in history and on earth, people can unify around a wrong cause and do damage. So he had to interrupt their illegitimate attempt at unity so that it would not even bring on greater judgment from him, because he's been left out of the process. Conversely, Jesus prays in John 17 that his people might be one. And he makes a powerful statement in verses 23 to 25. He says that they might be one, perfect them in unity, so that they might see my glory. So when there is unity that is reflective of God and not unity that is in opposition to God, it is an invitation to God to be dynamically involved in the process. But illegitimate unity will bring his wrath, because he doesn't want unity that leaves him out.
Let's talk about that kingdom agenda for just a minute, because you've talked many times about wanting to have a time of the church showing unity to the world, because the church's failure to come to grips with this is the model. And so in the book of Ephesians, also we see the importance of unity. And so, again, you want to provide some models where the church sets to the world, sets the agenda for the church, actually setting it for the world, rather than the world setting the agenda for the church.
Well, I love the book of Ephesians. It's my favorite book in the New Testament, and it really is an ecclesiastical document. And while we often talk about Ephesians from a personal point of view, every chapter either uses the word church or a synonym for the church, because he's talking about collective Christianity. I love chapter 3, verse 10 in Ephesians, where it says that the wisdom of God may be made known to the rulers through the church. So God wants to show the spiritual world as well as the physical world and the powers that be what the church can do in bringing light to the darkness in the culture. And one way that is to be manifested, demonstrated, and illustrated is through unity. In chapter 2, verses 11 to 22, Paul gives a theological treatise on unity. He begins the chapter talking about grace, but then he ends the chapter talking about race. So he moves from grace to race, and race would be the first subject matter that he would talk about as the good work we should be involved in. And we call that a kingdom race theology, because it's building one new man, not trying to fix. He wants to give us a windshield, not a rearview mirror. We spend time talking about rearview mirror. We need to get to the windshield.
We're going to take a break, and when we come back, continue our conversation with Dr. Tony Evans. Matter of fact, going to cover a few other things in his book, a great historical overview of the black church, some of the key figures, but also some action items. What should white Christians do? What should black Christians do? And again, this book is much longer than we can cover in half an hour, so we'll probably have you on in studio to cover it in depth, because we've enjoyed the book, we've looked at it, and would really want other people to know about it. Published by Moody Press, it is out, and we have a link to his website. Broadcasting live from the National Religious Broadcasters Convention. We'll be back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Over the last 15 years of doing this commentary, I occasionally used the famous quote from G.K. Chesterton, "Don't ever take a fence down until you know why it was put up." A corollary might be, don't defund a program or institution merely because you haven't used it in some time. We live in a dangerous world. It is easy to forget that if you live in a safe neighborhood and haven't seen a war break out in Europe for more than 7 decades. There are criminals, terrorists, and dictators that threaten us. It's easy to forget until Vladimir Putin sends his Russian troops into Ukraine. He scoffs at the civilized Western world. He uses his power and military might while giving little attention to diplomacy. In fact, many leaders idolize his quest for power and prestige. Perhaps that explains why Donald Trump continues to say flattering and disturbing things about Putin, as well as other dictators in China and North Korea. NATO, the U.S. military, law enforcement, and even our wall on our southern border are examples of Chesterton's fence. We haven't needed NATO for some time. Democratic leaders in Congress want to reduce the size of the military, which we don't seem to be using very much. Why not defund the police? And isn't it time to tear down the wall that President Trump was building? Most people know the famous scene in A Few Good Men, "You can't handle the truth." But the next line from Colonel Nathan Jessup is relevant here. "Son, we live in a world that has walls, and those walls have to be guarded by men with guns." Walls and people with guns, both military and law enforcement, are what keep us safe and free. Vladimir Putin reminds us of that. The rising crime rate in our cities and current flood of illegal immigrants also remind us of that. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Inflation, go to viewpoints.info/inflation. That's viewpoints.info/inflation.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, broadcasting live from the National Religious Broadcasters Convention in Nashville, Tennessee. In studio with us, or around the table, I should say, Tony Evans and, of course, Penna Dexter. Might just mention the book Oneness Embraced is now out, and you can probably find it in your local bookstore, but we also have a link so you can get it in hardcover or Kindle. And, of course, we also have links to Urban Alternative and TonyEvans.org and a number of others. Oneness Embraced, and published by Moody Press.
I think it's going to be an important book for the church. And, it's Oneness Embraced. We're talking about a kingdom race theology. And I guess what I'd like to ask, Tony, is about cultural diversity. There's a big emphasis on it. And it's as a goal, as something to be achieved. But that's not the end game, is it?
The end game always goes to God's kingdom. The theme of God in history and the theme of the Bible is the glory of God through the advancement of his kingdom. So whenever you make diversity an end in itself, it may not be sufficient because it may not have the proper boundaries to define what it is, what it should look like, and how it should function. But when God's kingdom, God is not colorblind. I mean, in Revelation 5:9, in heaven, John could see people from every nation, every tribe, every kindred, every tongue. They were visually different. So whatever you are now is what you're going to be in eternity. The issue is that God is not blinded by color. He's not colorblind, but he's not blinded by color. In other words, he doesn't allow color and culture to be the final arbiter for decision making. And what we have done in the culture is made white, black, red, yellow a basis for decision making. And while the culture may do that, Christians ought never to do that. That's why Paul corrected Peter in Galatians chapter 2 because he was leaving the Gentiles because he didn't want to offend his own race, the Jews, and Paul had to correct him and tell him he was out of order with the gospel. Now, Peter was already on his way to heaven. He wasn't talking about his eternal salvation. He was talking about the application of the gospel in the day-to-day decision-making in our horizontal relationships. And my favorite verse in the Bible is Galatians 2:20. I'm crucified with Christ, nevertheless I live, yet not I, it's Christ who lives in me. The life which I now live, I live by faith in the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself for me. People quote that verse without noting the fact that that's Paul telling that to Peter. That's at the end of this story of Peter's racism. And he corrects him by clarifying, I don't care what your background is, Peter. I don't care what your position is. Your identity should be rooted in Christ. So black is only beautiful when it's biblical, and white is only right when it agrees with Holy Writ.
I know God, I love how you talk about the not being blinded by color that God is, because he created us. He created us, and he celebrates all the differences and beautiful ways that he created us. And I would love to just get that into the psyche, I think, of the church right now, as we're so divided.
Well, what's happened is a mist in the pulpit leads to a fog in the pew. Mm-hmm. And because of the failure of our pulpits to address this comprehensively, directly, but lovingly, we have facilitated the errant direction of the culture. We would not have this problem if the churches had not failed. But because the churches were more cultural than they were Christian, it allowed the breeding of this kind of vitriol to take place. And of course, then there are reactions to that are not legitimate either. So then we go back and forth. But that is rebellion, and it's idolatry. Whenever race, color, class, and culture is allowed to trump biblical love, you've created an idol out of your humanity, and God hates idolatry.
One of the things you talk about in your book is the idea of having a kingdom vision for cultural impact, and we're even looking at the idea of light and the darkness, those kinds of ideas. So how can we begin to have kind of a kingdom mindset to make a difference in the culture?
Well, first of all, we define the kingdom agenda as the visible manifestation of the comprehensive rule of God over every area of life. So what we are proposing is what we call a kingdom strategy for community transformation. And what we're saying in our 3-point plan that we initiated through the Urban Alternative is 3 A's. First of all, assemble. Once a year, get the biblical churches in your community to assemble for a solemn assembly, which in the Bible is a sacred gathering, to re-invite God into a chaotic situation. The second A is address. Speak with one voice what God says about the subjects that are affecting your community. The third is act, meaning as a community of churches, do something that benefits the whole city or community in which you live that's visible to them. Let men see your good works, not just hear your good words. Matthew 5:16. And when these adopt every school for the mentoring of students, adopt the police precinct to become the bridge between the police and the community. And what we've just launched is the culture of kindness, where we, through the Urban Alternative, will equip every church in America with acts of kindness cards. And you get your members to do an act of kindness once a week to somebody. Pray for them after you do the act of kindness. Share the gospel with them because they are now open to hear it because of your act of kindness. And if millions of people are doing that, they're seeing good works by Christians to fight against the vitriol that's in the community. And every community can do this, and we can create a movement of kindness in the culture.
And you've been doing these solemn assemblies all over the country.
Absolutely.
And if somebody wants to set one up, they can contact you.
They just contact us at the Urban Alternative, and you can, your church or a group of churches can do it, and it's easy to do.
It certainly is. So many things we're skipping over, but you have a whole section here on what should white Christians do, what should black Christians do. Can you give us a little bit of an overview? And we're going to give you a whole hour to cover that. Yeah, we're going to give you a whole hour up the next month here to get into it in more detail.
Well, yes. First of all, if I talk about what white Christians should do, we must recognize that racism is real. You know, I've been affected by it. If I would have tried to attend Dallas Seminary a few years before I attended it, they wouldn't have let me in, even though it was the leading theological center in America, because of the color of my skin, and they had accepted the cultural narrative. Okay? So it is there. I've been pulled over by police wondering why I was in a certain neighborhood strictly because of the color of my skin. So it is real and does have its effect personally and in a corporate way as well, normally called systemic racism. So we got to recognize racism is real. The second thing is, because it's real in the culture does not mean you are a racist, but you could be identified with something that is. I'll give you an illustration. Across the street from our church is a golf course. The golf course would not let blacks play on the golf course.
Yes. And
the way they did it was, if a member invited a black person to the golf course, 2/3 of the membership had to vote. But if 2/3 of the membership didn't vote on you, you couldn't get in, even though the person who voted for you, who brought you there, was not a racist. So you cannot be a personal racist, but have a structure that has been infiltrated by racism, which is a system. So it does exist. The second thing, though, is you shouldn't feel guilty for something you're not guilty of. So don't allow people to put racism on you when it is not there. Recognize it does exist, but be truthful about whether it is true of you or not. Then be purposeful about developing relationships. Don't just let it haphazardly happen. Let's be intentional with ourselves and our children and our churches, okay? So that's just a few of a list of things. What the black community needs to understand is everything is not racism. Because once you make everything racism, then nothing's racism,
right.
okay? Yeah. And we must own our share of the responsibility and not put on others, including the government, something that is our responsibility, the responsibility of our families. And while we got to train our children in the reality of racism, we also got to train them in responsibility, dignity, and not making our blackness a god. So that goes on both sides. So, we got a whole list, but those are just a few.
Great list. And Penna, 400 pages. There's no way we're going to cover it in half an hour, but we will try to do a better job.
It just whets the appetite today.
So good. And just so many. And as you said, it's really the book that the churches needed, because ultimately the reason we have the problem is because of the church's failure to come to grips with this issue in the first place.
And even if they don't want the whole 434 pages, we got a quick summary called Kingdom-Based Theology.
120 pages.
That's 120 pages if you don't want to go as deep as the book goes. So.
Yeah. Well, Tony, it's always just great to have you.
It's good to be with you,
Kerby.
You've been a great friend. Thank you.
50 years, you remember some of that? Marlon Maddox, and we've had you on many times, and we will have you on again. Penna, wasn't that just terrific?
It was wonderful. Very well needed. I'm not going to read the abbreviated edition. I'm going to read this whole book.
Okay.
Well, we're going to take a break, and when we come back, we will continue our conversation here today from the National Religious Broadcasters Convention. Jack Countryman will be with us. We're looking forward to that opportunity. And so, again, if you would like to know a little bit more, if you'd like to know about Tony Evans, you'd like to know about what he's doing at Urban Alternative, you'd like to know about some of the previous interviews we do with Chuck Bentley, it's all there at the website, pointofview.net. And I hope that you'll take the time to find those resources. But we are broadcasting, as I said, from the National Religious Broadcasters Convention right here in Nashville, Tennessee. And we'll be back with more right after these important messages.
We live in a digital generation. Point of View is reaching this often overly plugged-in generation with truth. You can keep up with us 24 hours a day using your phone, your tablet, your laptop, or your desktop. Search for the Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, where you can keep up with today's issues, learn about current and upcoming guests by liking us on Facebook. Also, follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @Point of View RTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. Learn, interact, make a difference with Point of View using new media. And here's one way you can make a big difference. Help us increase our reach by spreading the word among your friends. Share a Facebook post. Tag us in a tweet. With enough joining us to plant seeds, we'll see a tremendous harvest. Come on, it only takes a minute. Search for Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, @Point of View RTS on Twitter, and subscribe to the Point of View Radio Talk Show channel on YouTube. Learn, interact, share. The Point of View Radio Talk Show. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back for final half hour today as we are talking and broadcasting from the National Religious Broadcasters Convention in Nashville, Tennessee. Penna Dexter, it's been a good convention. We've had all sorts of people coming and watching, and we are now going to be talking to somebody that we're meeting actually for the first time.
Well, I think it's been a great day to do today also, so I'm very excited about Jack Countryman and this book. It's The Power of Hope. I think we need a lot of hope these days. 100
Devotions to Build Your Faith. And Jack Countryman, of course, is the founder of Jack Countryman Gift Books, and is an individual that actually was the recipient of Evangelical Christian Publishers Association Jordan Lifetime Achievement Award, and he joins us now across the table. So thank you for being with us today.
Well, it's my privilege to be with you, and I really appreciate the opportunity.
You've been to some of these events before, haven't you? So talk about that.
You know, I was thinking, when was the first time I came here? And it was 1982, 40 years ago.
I think that's the first time I came in 1982. At that time, Pro Ministries had just a 5-minute program, and we only were on a few stations, but I wandered around and got to know.
And you were both
this was all about.
children.
Yes, 1982. But again, we are talking about, of course, you can see this as well, the fact that Point of View has been around since 1972. And Marlon Maddox started it in 1972, and so we are going to be doing tonight a celebration of our 50th anniversary. And then tomorrow night, I guess, Penna, we're going to be receiving an award for that as well.
For 50 years before the whole NRB. I think it's well-deserved, yes, but also a great honor.
Well, you've been bringing light to the world through your radio for 50 years, and that's an accomplishment within itself.
I would say so, especially all the things that have changed since then. I'm old enough, and you're probably old enough to remember when we used to do it on reel-to-reels, and then we used to do it on carts, and Penna used to do remember all those carts you did for news?
I used to do news packages on, I don't even want to describe what a card is. I'm glad we have computers now.
Yeah, and now it's all digital, so it is pretty amazing. But let's see if we can just spend a little bit of time getting to know Jack.
Well, speaking of bringing light to the world, we sort of have a world that needs some extra light right now. And, we look at the headlines right now, from COVID to what we discussed in the last segment, just racism and some of these solutions to racism that aren't too wise, that Tony Evans talked about, to the leftist ideology and the sexual perversion being taught to our children in the schools, to inflation. I mean, everything looks bad, and sometimes it looks hopeless, and it's really, none of it is a surprise to God, though, is it?
No. In spite of the pandemic, in spite of the European war, in spite of all the people that, there are 38 million people that either quit their jobs or are out of work. In spite of all of that, I must say that God is still in charge. God still wants us to come to Him and surrender to Him so that He can live in the center of our lives and bring us to the position that He wants us to have for His glory.
Coming to NRB this week, I've looked at people's faces, some of the people that I've seen that have been in ministry for a long time, and they have a serious look to them, more than you would normally see, until you sort of engage in conversation. And I do think there's something just kind of laying over the culture right now, those of us who are concerned that, it's heavy. And so I think to have a book like you have just written, The Power of Hope, is going to be helpful, especially when you look at, and what it does is goes back to biblical figures all across the Old and New Testament and how God gave them hope.
Hope is mentioned in the Bible 190 times.
Really?
So God really wants us to have hope. And hope is kind of something that He bathes within us and gives us the opportunity to come to Him and surrender to Him. And I pointed out 56 characters in the 100 Devotions, 56 people who found hope in Jesus Christ. and found hope in the Lord. For instance, let's just take Paul.
Mm-hmm.
Paul was a character that was a reprobate. I mean, he really hated Christians, did everything he could to down the Christian church. But Jesus met him on the road to Damascus and changed his life and gave him all the hope he ever needs, because he became a pillar. Wrote 13 epistles, and he was just a giant, and nothing would deter him. Nothing would get him off track. Nothing would keep him from preaching the Word of God, because Jesus was in his heart, and Jesus gave him all the hope he ever needed.
Going back to the Old Testament, I always wonder how Abraham did what he did.
Absolutely.
How did he believe God and have hope?
Yes. Well, Abraham's a part of the book, and of course he is our father, and is the beginning of everybody that's been created, and so it did that. I also wrote about Gideon. Gideon was a character that had no confidence, did not believe that he could even lead the armies, and so he tested God. He said, if you'll just put this fleece and put water on the fleece and nothing on the ground, I'll believe. He did that. Next day, there's water on the fleece, nothing on the ground. And he said, well, why don't we I need one more test. And he said, let's do water on the ground and not on the fleece. God did that. God is so patient with us and so loving us so much, he'll put up with all of our shenanigans because he wants us to come to him. He wants us to surrender to him. He wants to bless us and live in the center of our lives, and he wants us to be everything that we've been called to be.
Talking with Jack Countryman, and the book is entitled The Power of Hope, 100 Devotions to Build Your Faith. And one of the others that you talk about is the difference between fear and hope, Joshua and Caleb. And Jack, right now we are dealing with a lot of fear. People are fearful about the future in terms of the economy, fearful about whether or not this war in Europe will expand, fearful about what might happen to their job if they stand up for biblical ideas. So it seems to me that we need a fair amount of hope in the midst of the kind of fear that many people are facing right now.
Well, fear is man-given. God, there is no fear with God. There is no fear in his book. He wants us to trust him and depend on him and live with him and for him. And he's promised to give us the peace that passes all understanding. You know, in Philippians 4, 6, and 7, it's be anxious for nothing, but by prayer and supplication let your requests be made known to God, and the peace of God, which passes all understanding, will guard your heart and mind as you trust in Christ Jesus. So he is the answer.
I love how you say it here. Joshua and Caleb were in the minority. The report of the other 10 men had sent the spy out to the land of Canaan were very different from Joshua and Caleb's. Those 10 brought back not only a cluster of gapes that required 2 men to carry it on a pole, but also stories of giants in the land, stories that filled the people of God with fear. But then, of course, Joshua and Caleb stood up. The land we passed through to spy out is an exceedingly good land, and reminded them of, again, greater is he who's in you than he who's in the world, because that's
right.
a lesson that we need to learn today in the 21st century, don't we?
You know, we see these ways that God answered prayer and sort of fulfilled the hope that people had, but sometimes the circumstances don't change. But that doesn't mean that we still shouldn't have hope, does it?
No. Our circumstances may not change, but if you're just faithful, if you're just obedient, if you just put God first in your life, because he will not take second place. He will promise that he will bless you, that he will fill you with all the peace that you will ever need, and he will watch over you. You know, we oftentimes go through difficult times, but they're all times of molding you to be what God wants you to be.
In hindsight sometimes, isn't
yes,
it?
and testing you. and helping you to grow into the person God wants you to be. So my word to you is, don't give up. Hang in there. There's light at the end of the tunnel. God loves you and cares for you and wants you to be someone who, God has a mission for each and every one of us. Seek it and you'll find it. Just remember that God loves you and he wants you to be his witness. He wants you to be his ambassador. And he will.
We'll take a break and continue our conversation with Jack Countryman, The Power of Hope, and it is 100 Devotions to Build Your Faith, published by Thomas Nelson. Look for it in your local bookstore. We have information about it on our website, pointofview.net.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. Let me just mention as a program note, first of all, that tomorrow we're going to have Robert Morgan on with us, and we'll have Shane and Shane, E.W. Jackson, and then maybe Lathan Watts will finish us off and do kind of our typical roundtable discussion. So just lots of things to talk about today. And, of course, we still have for a few more minutes Jack Countryman, The Power of Hope, 100 Devotions to Build Your Faith. Penna?
Yes, and I would say this would be fun to do as a devotional, because you're seeing a biblical character in every devotion. And so we've talked about Paul, we've talked about Abraham, Gideon, but I would like to talk about Mary, because Mary believed God. And I think that's part of hope, is to believe God, isn't it?
Well, Mary was just a teenager, and her maturity just blows me away. because the angel spoke to her and she believed without question. And she felt she was going to be blessed, which she was. And so she is really a wonderful character, and she had all the hope anyone would ever want. To think that she was going to have God's son and bring him into the world and be his mother, that is just a fantastic thing.
It is, but when it happened, when she was told it would upend her life, and not in a good way really in that culture. And so for her to believe then and to just look forward to what was told to her, that I think is a great example of hope.
She didn't care. That's what's so amazing. All the embarrassment that would come with having a child out of wedlock and everything was not important to her. The important thing was she was going to be the mother of our Savior.
One of the things that you have been involved with for some time are a lot of other books on promises and hope. So how do those come together, too? Because, we talk about our blessed hope and looking forward to the day in which we're joined with the Lord. But a lot of that is to depend upon those promises you've written about in some of these other books. So how do you see those come
God's
together?
Promises was our first book.
Yes.
And we brought it out in 1982. I remember standing before my Sunday school class, and he said, I believe this book will sell 50,000.
You had hope.
I had hope. Today, there's 11,700,000 of those books out in the marketplace. I've received letters all over. I was in China back about 6 years ago with Hank Hanegraaff.
Right.
And so we were going to Shanghai, and we're staying at the Westin Hotel. And the owner of the hotel is a Christian, Elijah Bajaja. And so I was introduced to him. He said, well, he's the creator of God's Promises. He says, God's Promises? You got to be kidding. I've had that book for 17 years, and my copy is all worn out. And I thought to myself, gee whiz, it's here in China. And I promised him a new one in the morning, and I delivered. And so it's just amazing how I, oh ye of little faith, thinking that it was just going to be an oh-so book, become an all-time bestseller.
And part of that is the fact that God has called for each one of us to be faithful. It doesn't necessarily mean we'll be successful from the world's point of view, but it's enough light for each step that you take, right? And you were being faithful back in 1982. And, of course, since then you've had, God's promises for every need, God's promises for men, God's promises for women, and God's blessing just for you. And, of course, the one we're talking about today, the power of hope. So there is a sense in which you can really pass on a lesson to maybe some of our younger listeners today. They might say, well, God, just bless me right now. But sometimes there is a time of just being faithful and allowing God to deal with the consequences, right?
God is standing there waiting for each of us to come to him. God is waiting for us to surrender to him. God will not be second place. If you'll just get it early in life, you'll save yourself so much pain. I oftentimes put my hand up and said, if I'll just keep God right here, I'd keep Jesus right in front of me, I will be all right. Because if I get out there, my egotistical mind, my self-centered person will take over, and I will be in trouble. So I want to tell young people, come to the Lord early in life. Let him be your guide early in life. Let him fill you with all the hope you'll ever need, because he's waiting to do so. And if you'll do that, you will be blessed, and you'll have the peace that only God can give.
I do look back sometimes and think, wow, if I'd only trusted God more about that situation back those many years ago, you have to look back and regret, but you can't really undo the past. So what are your suggestions? I mean, you say you still have to hold God right before you, and I agree with that. As we get older, it doesn't mean we have it all together, but we at least, I think, as believers, who have walked with the Lord for a while begin to understand that we can't ever get too far away from looking at Jesus, can we?
When you build your castle for the Lord, Satan has his shack right next door. He's just waiting for you to make a slip, for you to doubt, for you to wonder whether or not God is real to you. And so it's just, and he will test your faith, because Satan doesn't want to own you. He just wants to influence you. And so my word to all the young people out there today, please, please, please come to the Lord. Let him be the Lord and master of your life, because he loves you. He wants the best for you. And therefore, surrender to him and let him take over.
So good.
Be surprised what may happen.
Yes. Jack Countryman, thank you so much for being with us. Again, the book is The Power of Hope. We do have information about it on the website. It's been out for a couple of months, but it's published by Thomas Nelson, 100 Devotions to Build Your Faith. And again, we have a link so that you can find some of those other books and those promise books as well. And so it has been a delight to have you come here. And since 1982, you and I have been coming. I have been coming consistently, but you've been coming here to the National Religious Broadcasters.
Just 40 years.
Just 40 years. And 50 years here. It's 1972. We'll have a celebration tonight for 50 years of A Point of View. And Penna, I'm looking forward to that, aren't you?
I am too. It's going to be fun.
Well, just before we run out of time, let me just give you a preview for tomorrow. That is, Robert Morgan will be with us. And, of course, he's written so many books, Red Sea Rules, you know those and all that. Mm-hmm. But we'll be talking about 50 final events in world's history. Shane and Shane, I know you're going to be talking to them about their musical development. E.W. Jackson, who broadcasts, of course, on our Family Research, yeah, that's right, American Family Radio. Yes, I was trying to remember the name of that. And also part of the National Awakening Conference. And then we'll certainly with him and maybe with Lathan Watts do a little bit of that round table, because we always do the Friday round table, and that's just a great opportunity to talk about that. Today, of course, we've been talking about all sorts of other issues, including Ukraine, and we've had a chance to talk with everybody from Tony Evans to Chuck Bentley. So if you'd like to know about any of those books, including this one that we've talked about with Jack Countryman, all of it available at the website at pointofview.net. And Penna, this has been a good conference, but I'm looking forward to tonight because we're going to celebrate 50 years of a broadcast.
I can't believe it's already Thursday. It's gone quickly, and I am excited for tomorrow because we're going to have a little half of the show be sort of our weekend edition, and the rest of it will be this fun special NRB roundtable that we've got here. But yes, I'm kind of proud to be associated with Point of View, and we've had that longevity for 50 years. It's nice to hear everybody else talking about it too.
Well, that's all we have for today, and we look forward to hearing from you tomorrow, and we certainly want to continue broadcasting. We will tomorrow broadcast again from the National Religious Broadcasters. That's all for today. See you here tomorrow.
Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas recently said, "The Declaration of Independence has weathered every storm for 245 years. It birthed a great nation. It abolished the sin of slavery, and it endeavored to address its effects. While we have failed the Declaration time and again, and the ideals of the Declaration time and again, I know of no time," said Thomas, "when the ideals have failed us." While some see our founding as fatally flawed and promote ideas that have failed every time they've been tried, at Point of View, like Justice Thomas, we still believe in America's ideals. And if you do too, make a difference today. Join the Truth Team as we promote the unchanging truth that gave us liberty and prosperity. Visit pointofview.net/team or call 1-800-347-5151. The original Americans responded to the call. Will you? Pointofview.net/team and 1-800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.